The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Views and opinions expressed by guest speakers are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the view of Highlines Help for Abused Spouses or any of its funders, employees, or board members. Highlines Help acknowledges that our parties mentioned in this podcast are innocent until proven guilty by a court of law, and all statements are the opinions of the guests.
Highlines Help would like to take a moment to talk about Coulee Cuts Beef in Conrad, Montana. They are really great with giving donations to Highlines Help of ground beef for victims who need a little bit extra in their freezer when they're trying to start over. Really appreciate all they do for us. Give them a look up on Facebook if you're local to the Conrad area. They are also on Instagram, and they have a store in Conrad on 4th Avenue. So we would just like to shout out to Coulee Cuts for all they do for our program and for the community. Thank you very much, Coulee Cuts Beef.
The following podcast may contain discussion of domestic and/or sexual violence, stalking, suicide, and PTSD. There is also the possibility of strong language that may be inappropriate for young listeners.
Hi, and welcome to Highlines Help's podcast, Breaking the Silence, bringing domestic violence and sexual assault into the light. This podcast is the start of several episodes speaking with Angela Mastrovito. Angela's daughter, Rebekah Grace, disappeared on July 20th, 2021, near Missoula, Montana. Her vehicle and personal belongings were found off Interstate 90, but Rebekah and her dog were missing. What has unfolded in the 3 years since that day is truly unbelievable. In the next several episodes, Angela talks to us about what she and her family have been through, the heartache of feeling invisible, and still not knowing for certain what happened to Rebekah, along with the barriers and brick walls she has encountered from all angles. She tells us about Rebekah's abusive relationship with her husband and her efforts to leave and begin her life again. Angela's love for her daughter keeps her fighting every day for justice, no matter how heartbreaking it is. This mother's cry will not be silenced. I feel that so often in interviews like this, it tends to jump right to what happened. I would like to take this first episode to get to know who Rebekah was. She was someone who was quiet in demeanor, but full of life, adventurous in spirit, and radiated light and love for those around her. Rebekah was a beautiful young woman with so much life left to live and so much love left to give. And no one should ever forget who Rebekah Grace was.
Hi, this is Connie Huffman with Highlines Help for Abused Spouses with another segment of Breaking the Silence. And today have the privilege of meeting and talking with Angela Mastrovito about her daughter. And so at this point, what I really would like is for you to tell us about your daughter.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank you, Connie, and you, Dawn, for even considering and inviting me to have this opportunity. Rebekah, and it's spelled Rebekah, the Hebrew spelling. I'm going to start with the good points so that people can know who she is. Rebekah was born on December 28th, 1987, in a rural area of Spotsylvania, Virginia, called Partlow. We were a half hour, 45 minutes from anything in good weather, and she was born on a very blustery, icy, snowy, horrible weather night. Took us like an hour and a half to get to the hospital because the roads were so bad. And that really should have given me some kind of indication that she was going to be called to a state like Montana. And when I was pregnant with Rebekah, I was in a carpool to take her older brother to school. And she would make her presence known quite often because she would elongate in the womb to the point where it would take my breath away, and I would have to pull over and get out and stretch so that I could breathe again. But I used to sing to her even when she was in the womb and before she was married, or before she was born, and even after she was born, when I would nurse her, I would sing a song that God just brought to me that I would say, Rebekah Grace Rose is a gift from God. And she truly, truly lived up to that. I would just sit and rock her and sing that song to her over and over. And after she was born, we had 2 women in the community that just lived down the street. And when they came over, they just said, "This is Partlow's Angel." And so actually that nickname, if you will, that they assigned to her became an opportunity that every year for her birthday, I bought her a little angel. And so every year she got an angel, and I made real sure that because it was her birthday was so close to Christmas, that we actually did a birthday celebration with birthday paper and a birthday cake that wasn't Christmas oriented. And she just always was full of life. She was very inquisitive, very adventurous. When she was about 2.5, we lived on a main road in the country, and I'd be outside in the backyard working in the garden or hanging clothes, and she'd just take off on me, and I'd turn around and she'd be heading towards the front of the house. So I'd be running after her to bring her back. And I decided we needed to get a herding dog. So we got a Sheltie, and the Sheltie's name was Katie, and she did her job because I trained the dog that the dog couldn't go beyond the back of the house. And so anytime she saw Rebekah go forward on the driveway or to head to the front of the house, she would herd Rebekah right back. So she did really well. And Rebekah had, because we always had animals, we always had cats and dogs and whatever, she had an immense love for nature and animals because we were always outside. And I'll never forget, we bred Katie once, and she had like 9 puppies. And Rebekah was out there in the pen with Katie, sitting there in the corner, totally exhausted because she'd been playing with these puppies all morning, and she had fallen asleep, and the puppies were just all on her lap. And that was just, she loved being with them, and she loved being outside. She loved the cats, and she loved just... At one point when she was older, she worked at a blueberry farm behind our house and helped there at the nursery. But the biggest thing is she loved things that were living and had life to them. And we used to go help our neighbors in the wintertime because a lot of our neighbors were older and they couldn't shovel their path from their car to their doorstep and things like that. And I remember plenty of winters us trudging down the road with our snow shovels. And one lady in particular, she was a widow. And then Edith and Ellen, who had named Rebekah Partlow's Angel, we would go down and make sure they were okay. I homeschooled Rebekah, which had a lot of challenges because Rebekah had a learning style I wasn't used to. Rebekah was a very kinesthetic learner, and she had to be on her feet. Rebekah was challenged by sitting at a desk and writing on a piece of paper. It frustrated her. So early on, I had to start thinking out of the box because I only knew traditional schooling methods. And so I was like, we have to figure this out. And so Rebekah's dad made a writing board, and we got markers, and she could write at the board to learn her letters. I took a cookie tray and put pudding on it or whipped cream on it, and she would trace the letters and the numbers in the whipped cream or whatever. And of course, if she got it right, she could lick the finger.
A cute idea.
We did crazy things. Like in the wintertime, she had friends over and the weather was too nasty outside. So we did crazy things like put shaving cream on a linoleum floor and letting them slide down the hallway. But it was fun, and they had a blast. And she was very involved in church, in missionettes, which was kind of I guess a Christian segue of Girl Scouts in our church. And then she was very involved with 4-H. Rebekah always wanted to get involved with horses. And so when she was 4 or 5, 4-H had a group called Clover Buds. And it helped to introduce you to a horse without riding it. And I told her, I said, you don't get to just get on the back of a horse. You have to learn about it first. So she started at the very bottom and went her way up. And we were blessed, so blessed with a 4-H leader. Her name is Nadine. She took Rebekah in. And like so many families, when you have little ones, you're struggling to make ends meet. And Rebekah was allowed to ride and receive lessons in exchange for both of us being barn slaves. And so it was just wonderful because she was getting to do what she loved, but I get to watch her as she developed in her association and her relationship with the horses and her horsemanship. She started out with the English riding, equestrian style, and then as she grew older, she wanted to get into barrel racing, which Nadine was having heart failure over, and and things like that. But she loved it. She loved the horses. The horses were her passion. Because I homeschooled her, she graduated 2 years earlier. So she graduated at 16. In 6th grade, when I took her for testing, which was required for Virginia homeschoolers each year, the administrator said, well, you realize that this is the same test as 7th grade. And I said, well, no, I didn't know that. Well, Rebekah heard that. And she said, well, then I'm not taking 7th grade. And I was like, okay, we'll figure this out. So we skipped a grade. And then when we got to her junior testing, the administrator said, well, you realize that in the state of Virginia, at that point in time anyways, the junior and the senior assessment tests are the same. And Rebekah heard that. And she said, then I'm skipping next year. Oh. And I was like, well, you know, all right. So what we did was we submitted an application to the community college. And she segued into the community college, taking just 2 or 3 classes just to get her feet wet. I didn't think about the challenge it created from an age standpoint because Rebekah at 16 was in college with students from the age of 18 primarily to 25. And so that created a whole lot of social challenges because she couldn't understand why she couldn't do what they were doing.
Right.
So Rebekah filled her time with the community college, the classes, the horses. She loved the horses. And then I suggested to her, I said, I think it's time you go to work since you're 16, you can drive now. So her first job was at the nursery, and then she progressed to the marinas around where we lived. And so she worked at the marinas, on the boats, detailing them, whatever. A friend of ours, Charlie Hodge, he worked at the marina that they hired her at. And so he taught her mechanics and things like that. And she could stand her own. You know, she was a hard worker. Rebekah had a very strong work ethic. And if you gave her a challenge, she would learn it. Rebekah was very detail-oriented. She liked things in a certain place, although as most teenagers, her room was a little messy. But she did like things in order. And she was not afraid to research and figure out, what is it I need to know to get from point A to point B? And as most teenagers, you know, they all go through that phase. There were times where I had to stop and remind myself that in 5 or 10 minutes, whatever she was telling me that was like making me real, and go, oh no, you can't do that. That in 5 or 10 minutes, it would change, you know, as with most teenagers. So that was a real learning curve, you know, because her older brother was just totally involved in sports and nothing but sports. And Rebekah had so many different interests. And one of the things in her homeschooling years, we were just so blessed. We always had a co-op to be in, or another parent that had a special interest. And I remember my dad, who was very much against homeschooling in the beginning. He just thought that was the worst thing I could do to her. He came back to me when she was 9 years old, and she usually spent the majority of the summers with her grandparents. He said, I can't believe it. Rebekah can speak to an infant, and she can speak to a 99-year-old, and she can carry on a conversation without any assistance from anyone else. That was like my dad saying that to me. That was everything. That was everything. Rebekah was very, very close to her grandfather. He passed when she was 17, and she took it really hard. She stopped going to college classes, which I didn't know, because she still left the house. She just stopped going. She was still going to work. At that point in time, she was working as a server at Cheeseburger in Paradise in town. But she came home one day about 3 months later, and she said, I'm not guaranteed tomorrow. I'm leaving. And I'm going, where are you going? And she goes, I'm going to Sandpoint, Idaho. And I'm going, Sandpoint, Idaho? How did you come up with that? And she had been out west on a missions trip with the church group a couple years earlier. During homeschool days, every year I coordinated a learn to ski program at Massanutten, so she snowboarded. And Rebekah said, well, I've researched it, and they have a great opportunity to snowboard out there. It's a big, big area for that. I'm going to go learn how to be a snowboard instructor. And I'm like, well, I'm sure real snow is a lot different than man-made snow, because we have man-made snow in Virginia. And I said, I'm sure there's a learning curve. No problem. I can do it. And so we kept talking about this. And she came home again, and she goes, I'm going. And I said, well, how are you going to get out there? She goes, I'm driving. I said, not by yourself, you're not, you know. And so then some more time would pass, and by the time she was 18, she was going, oh, I'm still going. And I said, okay, how are you getting out there? I'm going with a girlfriend. And I'm going, oh my God, that's double risk, you know? And so I said, I just don't know about this, Rebekah. And she came home, and she goes, the dishwasher is going to go with me. I mean, I knew that at that point that she was just, that she was going to go. That was her, she was driven. That was her decision. So I actually met the dishwasher. I don't remember his name offhand, but I met the dishwasher. I met his family. We combined efforts. We had multiple yard sales to come up with the money for these kids to drive across country, and determined which car had the better chance of making it across country, and sent them on their way. And they camped at every national state park on the way out. and they played Frisbee disc golf at the ones that had disc golf, because that's what they liked to do. And they broke down in Cody, Wyoming, and had to wait for a car part to get shipped in. And then went on to Sandpoint, Idaho, but they got there in September before the snow season. And the few locals that lived there suggested that they backtrack to Missoula, that they would be much happier in Missoula. And so they did. They both settled there, but went their separate ways after they got there. And Rebekah fell in love with Missoula. She fell in love with Montana, more specifically. The openness, the mountains, the rivers, the wildlife, the night skies. Rebekah was not a morning person, so I won't say sunrise spoke to her. Rebekah used to say that if God wanted you to see the sunrise, he would have made it later in the day. But she did like the sunsets. She just always loved it. She would come home, and so that was in, 2008. She moved out. 2007, I think it was like the fall of 2007, 2008. 2007, she moved out to Montana. She stayed. She came home a couple times, but she always said, I need to go back. As a mom, it's scary to have your child go that far and not have a plan. She didn't really have a plan. She made it work, and she loved it. I came out in 2008 with her brother, Tony, and we visited for a week, and I could see why she loved it, but it's very different than living on the back east, back east. The whole culture is different. She worked primarily as a server and a bartender after she became of age to be a bartender. And she loved it because she got to speak to people and communicate with people and serve people. And she was on her feet. And as a kinesthetic learner, that was important to her, being on her feet and on the move. And she just truly enjoyed what she did. And when I came out here and met some of her coworkers, she had worked at the Plonk right before Rebekah went missing. They all said that they loved her, and that when they saw Rebekah was on the schedule for that night, that they knew it was going to be a great night. Not only a good night, but a great night. Because they said no matter how bad it got, how busy it got, how obnoxious some of the customers could be, that Rebekah would always put them at ease and say, it's going to be okay. We can do this. Regardless of the size of the party or what was going on, she would say, we can do this. And they just thoroughly enjoyed her presence. Her friends have all said that too. And so Rebekah had a big impact on people, and I'm not sure she realized the impact.
A lot of times they don't.
Yeah.
Because it's not about them. It's
right.
It's about somebody else.
Right.
And that's what drove her, it sounds like.
Yes.
Is being able to do for other people.
Yeah.
And to see that other people are taken care of.
Yeah. And after she left home, I learned so much more about her as an adult, because you have a different vision of them and understanding of them as your child. But I met neighbors who Rebekah had befriended and bought tiny little dog vests for to take over to them, neighbors that she had befriended. And every year Rebekah would make chocolate chip cookies and pass them out at the holiday time, Thanksgiving. And had we not come out to Montana, my husband and I, we would have never learned about that side of Rebekah. And for that, I'm so thankful that we did come out. I also learned when we came out that Rebekah had enrolled at the University of Missoula to go to paralegal school and had applied there. I just learned so many things about her. That's where I always thought she was an orderly person, but then when we presented at her trailer, everything was in a spot. It was like, oh my gosh, she outdid me in organization. So yeah, and Rebekah's spirit has lived on. Rebekah was adventurous. She was always hiking and doing these 3-day camping trips with nothing. I don't know what you call them, but it was just her, and she'd be out in the wild and she'd love it. Primitive hiking, I don't know what you call it, but that's what she would do. And she loved the river. She loved what Missoula had to offer. And during her stay, during her move out here, she did meet her husband, David, and they dated for a couple years, I think. I think they met in 2013. So Rebekah moved out here in 2008. And they got married in 2015, September of 2015. We had been out, my son and I came out to visit in 2008. And then Jerry and I came out to visit, my husband and I came out to visit in 2013, I think right before she started dating David. And then Tony had come out a couple times on his own during that time so they could go snowboarding. And things just changed. There wasn't as much contact. And I always thought, it's just, working, newly married, things like that. The time change always threw us for a curve. The time change and the time difference, because it's just enough that when I'm up, she was asleep, or when I was asleep, she was up. And especially our different roles. I worked days, she worked evenings and nights, being in the restaurant business. Right. So there was always a challenge there, but we always seemed to work through it. But I remember she was supposed to have this really elaborate wedding, and that's what she kept talking about. And on horseback and on a farm and with the wagon and all this. And then just out of the blue, I get a text message, we eloped. And I'm like,
oh, wow.
Oh, okay. And no real explanation. But I didn't hear from her after that for several weeks. When we got out here, I started going through my old emails, and I found the email that was just 3 weeks after she got married. And out of everything I could have said, the email I wrote to her was, "Are you safe?"